Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of our show, #TrueDataOps. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. Each week, we'll bring you a podcast covering all things data ops with the people that are making data ops what it is today. So today, our special guest for the last show of 2022, our holiday edition, is Mark Balkenende. He's a very experienced enterprise data integration architect and currently serves as the VP of product marketing for Matillion. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Kent. Pleasure being here, and I wish I had my Santa hat on.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the folks that are joining us today that don't know you very well, can you give us a little bit about your background in data management and what you've been up to these days?
Absolutely. I always struggle if I should start from the beginning and go to the end, or go through end to the
Start at the
beginning.
beginning.
All right. So I spent about 12 years in information technology positions, mostly in the Chicagoland area, serving as enterprise architect, enterprise data integration, doing all types of data management work. So I worked at companies like Abbott Labs, Motorola, Walgreens, and doing everything from master data management, data governance, mostly all around data integration, though, supporting warehouses, operational data stores. I think the 5 nines killed me, and I went to the dark side, I guess you could say. After doing a little bit of consulting, I ended up at a ETL vendor for about 9 years, doing different technical marketing. Went through the big data era basically at that company, and experienced all the big data fun that we all had with those type of technologies. And then the last couple of years, I've been doing product marketing for Matillion, which is also a data integration or data management company, where we just launched the Data Productivity Cloud. But we are essentially an ELT platform that allows our customers to really take full advantage of that cloud investment that they've made. And so I've been staying up to speed on all things data management in the last few years as well. So
Wow. Yeah, that's great. You've got quite a good breadth of experience there, pretty similar to some of the things that I've done in the past. And I more or less kind of made that same transition, though kind of accidentally, ending up turning into the data warrior, and then my gig that I had at Snowflake as the chief evangelist.
yes,
Very interesting. But yeah, I
I,
had the 5 nines. Yeah, I think I did a lot of people in. Not a
it
lot of
was
sleep when you're managing that stuff.
just keeping not only your databases up 5 nines, but also all the applications. It was quite challenging. So for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't think about that. It's like, dealing with data warehousing, like you said, it's like, what happens if the ETL process falls over? Well, either
Yeah,
your data warehouse doesn't get refreshed, or somebody gets woke up to try
yeah.
to see what happened and see if we can get it
Uh,
going again.
I was charged with the part of the MDM system, the master data management system. For those that maybe don't even know what MDM is, lucky them. But keeping that system up 5 nines with our database in the back end as well. So it was a challenge for sure. So
Yeah, well, so with all the experience you've got, out there in the data world, what do you see out there today? What do you think's what's hot out there in the data space these days?
from our person or my perspective, and from people that I talk to, I don't think it's anything exciting that you're going to be blown away by, Kent, but it's really all the things still around data science, whether it's AI or ML, and how those are being used within businesses today to get ahead. Those still seem to be the hot topic that everybody wants to do. Seems like everybody wants to be a data scientist today. Not so many people want to be data engineers anymore, or working through the BI type platforms for sure. So
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of that going on, and with the continued movement towards trying to democratize all the data, but it is kind of a lot angled towards that, data science and machine learning part of the realm.
Absolutely. I think the continuation towards the lake house kind of effect as well, where whatever you want to call it, but getting those workloads into the same environment as well. So your data science with your BI and your data lakes combined with your data warehouses. I think that's going to be a continued motion as well this coming year is one of my predictions. As it just makes sense, right? Why would you want to silo your kind of your more raw data from the data that you're doing analytics on from data science and having different potentially get different answers from different data sets because you're not sharing. So it just makes more sense. It just seems obvious to me, but
Yeah, I know it's just like we just have bigger and better silos than what we had in the past, right?
right.
So yeah, and to a certain extent, I've said for a couple of years now, it's like the thing is like we need to come up with a data term, a better term than we had the data warehouse, and then we had data lakes, and then we tried to come up with this data lake house thing. It's like maybe we need something completely different because all those terms carry so much baggage with them historically as to
Absolutely.
all the failures and how hard it was and how expensive it was. I try to just like say, well, we're going to build an enterprise data platform. Let's just call it that. Something like that. Of course, Snowflake called it the data cloud, but I love that term, but it causes a lot of confusion for some people because they don't really know what that's
Yep.
almost it's to use the probably the wrong phrase, it's too nebulous for them, right?
A little bit, a little bit. I like your phrase though. It does no baggage associated yet, and it's pretty clear on what it provides. But I still think it's a matter of keeping that raw data available and close and making it easier for people to use all of their data across both their whatever data lakes to their data warehouses. So
Yeah, and I think we used to call that a persistent staging area. Right.
uh, we did, but that had baggage too because it was so
Yeah.
expensive. So back in the day, now it's much more reasonable. But
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that changed is, going to the cloud. Storage got so cheap, right? It's way cheaper. And then, when Snowflake did their separation of compute from storage, you're not even talking about how expensive it is to store the data in the database, which is what the arguments were before. Is you bought one of the other on-prem database systems, and the storage and everything was so tight. It was also tightly bundled that you couldn't separate the two. And so if you wanted to store hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data, you had to buy a bigger machine that database ran on, and it was very tightly coupled. And so it's like, well, we can't store all the data because it's just too expensive. So then we got Hadoop and file systems and NoSQL and all of that to try to solve the problem. And I think the advent of cloud storage like S3 and Azure Blob Storage really kind of solve that from a price perspective, right? And a
yes,
scalability perspective.
yes.
So, from your perspective, what's data ops? Oh, look at this. Yeah. Does data ops functionality live in IT or the business led data? So we'll get to that in a second, Ravi. I want to get Mark's take on what he thinks data ops is first, before we'll talk about where it lives.
It interesting because I feel like I should recant your definition of data ops, but but the data ops for me really is about the practice of orchestrating the end-to-end deployment and operations of all things data. So whether that's the ETL, ELT piece of it, the aggregations, um, the actual reports, the full end-to-end piece of extracting your data, storing your data, loading the data, and really making that a end-to-end process that you can repeat, orchestrate over and over, and as well as test the process. So if you were to change things, in that flow and in that process, being able to test that, the version control, the monitoring of it, all those pieces, being able to orchestrate that end to end, really is what I see as data ops, and what a lot of our customers and people that I've worked with use for data ops. And so hopefully that fits pretty close to your
It's
definition.
That's pretty close. You hit a number of the 7 pillars of true data ops in your comment there. Having the change control, being able to collaborate, we need some self-service. One of the keys to enabling all that is making sure it's modular, right? That it's
Yep.
small pieces, so we can develop in an agile, iterative fashion. With all that said, then we'll go back to Ravi's question: is where does the data ops function fit in an organization?
You're asking me that one?
Yeah,
I would ask you that.
I know. Yeah, this is I ask you, where do you think it fits from what you've seen?
What I've
What are your
seen,
customers doing? I mean, you have customers, so
yeah,
what are they doing?
what we've seen a lot of times is the central data team, or data, if there's a data team that's defined for our customers, which is a little bit more mature, I think, and more mature in their practices, would own the overall data ops function within their organization. So if they're spanning different groups within, for example, if they're supporting sales and marketing and different functions, we have some life science customers. So if they're supporting like clinical research versus their selling arm of pharma, the data ops would sit or live within that, and the organization that owns the data structures or the cloud platforms, and those things, they're the ones that are owning the data ops today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think there's we've recently started differentiating between like a data ops engineer, right? Someone
Mm.
who's responsible for managing all of that stuff. And yeah, it seems like that's kind of a more of an IT function, where before it would have been maybe a system administrator or a
Yeah,
database administrator. Now we have a data ops engineer that makes sure all that runs.
I have
One of
not run
the
across one of those yet, so
yeah we
I like
I
it.
know a couple. I know a couple.
Excellent, excellent. I like it.
Yeah, it's again, like so many things in our business, and it's an evolving role, because we really are only in the last couple of years been seriously talking about data ops, and this idea of the philosophy of true data ops and the 7 pillars. That's something we articulated back really kind of the beginning of COVID. It's probably about the time we started really getting that out there. So it's fairly
Which
new.
which I love, by the way. I love your 7 principles. Of course, the first principle is near and dear to my heart because of my job, and
The ELT and the spirit of ELT. Yes,
but
I should have
but that
known.
but it's also what drove me to go to Matillion. But the 7 principles are great, and actually principle number 4 is interesting as well. I'd love to talk more about that too. But yeah, of
Yeah,
course, number 1 I love. So.
yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yes. Well, good. I'm glad we have your support on number 1 for sure.
But especially when you talk about these cloud platforms, the number one, for those that don't know it, number one is ELT, and the spirit of ELT, but the ETL, spirit of ETL. So ELT is the extract, load, and transform. It just makes so much more sense when you're in a cloud platform, right? And because of how the cloud platforms work, also how customers get charged for cloud, usage, the network, and egress and ingress. There's just so many advantages using ELT when you're working in these cloud platforms as well. So
Yeah, and part of the philosophy too is what you said about having the raw data available, and so it's the ELT architecture, if you will. It's like we're going to extract the raw data from the source and load it basically as is into the platform, and then they do the transformation downstream
as
from there.
as
And
needed.
that's the parts that's the spirit of ELT, is the idea of getting that data available as quickly as possible, so people can start exploring it and doing the discovery and doing profiling and figuring out, a data scientist has to figure out, is that data even useful, right? before we even want to, I'll say, instantiate it further down in the platform, down the pipeline farther.
Agreed. And I think the other, huge benefit to that is, especially, a couple old timers like you and I sitting around talking about this back in the day, if you didn't have that persisted data, staging area, most time we truncated our staging areas just to save space and
Save
money and things like
space.
that. Our DBAs would chase us down and
Hey, can we
uh,
delete this data?
exactly. Where today, maybe that data, that raw data isn't helpful to you today, but in a month from now, somebody may ask that next question and be like, oh yeah, that was in that data flow. It's easy today, much, much easier today to go back and find that data and use it and take advantage of it. And whether that's putting it back into a report in your data warehouse or data science aspects and usage. So very helpful for this type
Well,
of work.
and even more so because things are changing so frequently.
Uh,
The business itself may change, and its use for the data, like you say, may appear that nobody even thought of before. But even more so, as we acquire new data, is that raw data in context of the new data might suddenly have meaning where before it didn't, right?
exactly. And you
So
don't have to
that's
go re-extract it and pull it back into your
Well,
used.
even if you can re-extract it, because that was something I ran into years and years ago that caused me to go to persistent staging type architecture. Was they say, oh, we do need that data after all, and you go back and like, okay, it's been purged from the operational system or it's been overwritten because they want to see the data as it was a year ago. It's like, well, that data is
Exactly a
not
year
there
ago.
anymore, right? It's gone.
Right.
That's part of one of the justifications really for data lakes, right? Is that people suddenly realize is like, well, okay, if we can afford to save it, we probably better, because you can't do those long views looking back if you don't have the data to look at. So yeah, that's kind of important. One of the things, again, back on Robbie's question, um, I think, like you said, it's kind of the core function of data ops, and maintaining a data ops platform, data ops tools, is predominantly an IT function, but there's a piece of it, the governance aspect, that I think belongs with the business units, because who really should be deciding who has access to the data, which data are we using, which data do we mask, which data do we obfuscate. From a self-service perspective, you want to have the business people actually, I'll say, they're not engineering the data ops, but they're using the functionality of the data ops platform to be able to um, specify how they want the data used, how it should be used, who should have access, all that governance, which is, again, another one of the pillars is um, collaboration, self-service, and another one is governance and security. So those two together kind of, to me, point to the business.
Definitely. Definitely, should always fall on that line of business or the owners of the data for sure, not necessarily IT or some centralized group. So I
Yeah.
agree.
So, do you have any tips or experiences from everything you've done on how an organization can help improve their maturity in this aspect with data management practices and data ops? Some people are like, they're still kind of clueless. How do they up their game to take advantage of this sort of stuff?
If you've never done it before, it's definitely can be something a little bit daunting to take a look at and say all seven of these pillars. I think looking at the seven pillars are great guidance and great place to start. I think some guidance around where would you start? What is the best place to start for your customers or for our customers? And being able to understand, or putting things in place, best practices, for example, around that governance piece, best practice around things like the agility, where you talk about the CI/CD, and introducing those types of concepts as you start building out your data practices, your data, whether it's the building your pipelines or the actual cloud platforms that you're choosing around your data lakes and then your warehouses. So starting in those areas, around, how do you build out your pipelines? How do you apply that CI/CD mentality to those pipelines, building in automated testing and monitoring as you go, as well as being able to have that environment control, or the control over dev, test, prod, and however many other environments you need, because I know it's never that simple. And having then then starting to put the governance in place, continue to keep that governance in mind throughout the whole life cycle. Then I feel like the other pieces will start falling into place. You can then easily start orchestrating those once you have that CI/CD. But I think if you were to try to tackle all these at once, that's where a lot of people fail, because it gets pretty heavy, to
Yeah.
implement all these best practices at once. It's really start taking and applying some of these steps as you go. So you start building your pipelines. Like I said, apply that some governance, as well as some of that CI/CD practice over top of it, and then start keep adding more and more principles as you go. And that's where we see people be more successful with it, rather than trying to jump in and do it all at once. So
Yeah. So I guess from where you are sitting today, I was going to ask you, which of the 7 pillars is the most important for success? I assume it's number one, right? Is
uh,
ELT, but
no, I wouldn't say that that's probably the most important. I think I think back to your point, that governance, security, control is probably really the starting point. Having a better understanding of the governance and control over your data before you start implementing all the others is really,
yeah,
unfortunately, it's where everybody starts last. I feel like they apply governance and those type of things after they've done everything, which is a very daunting task as well. So if you're starting out in a new environment, think about that governance, security, change control first, and
there you
start
go.
applying. So
Yeah, and I think about it. I think we've found that with a lot of our Snowflake customers when I was working with folks at Snowflake, is that designing the role hierarchy was kind of critical up front. Thinking about the what were the different roles, who was going to have access to what, so it has at least a high level plan of from a governance perspective of what data we're going to have in this enterprise platform, who's going to access it. You've got all these demands all over the place, from the data scientists down to the CEO and the CFO, and then the folks that are just doing BI analytics on a daily basis, and trying to figure that out, because it can affect how you architect the environment itself. How do you organize your databases? How do you name your databases? How do you name your schemas? Things like that even end up potentially being affected by how many different layers of security you might have and need to deal with. And then you throw in what you said, dev, test, and production, and how are you going to manage all of that, and who has access to this, that, and the other thing.
so can I ask you a question, Ken?
Sure.
I didn't know if this was only you ask me questions, or if I can ask you one.
Yeah, you can ask me a question.
Um,
Sure.
as I was
I'm
going through
Santa today.
your Santa today, as I was going through the principles, as I mentioned, principle number 4, which I believe is environment variables, or environment management. I mean, sorry. I was thinking how you implement some of these things, but
Yeah.
through variables. One of the discussions that we have internally at Matillion quite a bit, and Snowflake recently put something out, which I noticed has already been updated in your principles, is the state of the data. So as you're going through data ops, you know, traditionally it's all been about versioning the pipelines and versioning the reports and everything else. But one of the things that we always talked about was, that I have some debates internally with some people here, some of our thought leaders and very experienced people, is if you're not versioning the data as well, then how do you know the effects of everything that's changed, and how do you control the tests and the automating those tests and things? And Snowflake recently put out zero copy clone, which helps people do that, because if you have petabyte, you know zettabyte data sets, you're not going to just make copies of those easily. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be easy, right? So do you see something like the zero copy clone as being kind of a game changer for
Oh,
data
geez.
ops?
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
those
well,
of us.
it's funny because it was there long before data ops. I wrote a blog post very early on in my career at Snowflake, probably 5 years ago, maybe even 6 years ago, about doing agile DevOps using zero copy clone. And I worked with then the VP of sales engineering, Steve Herskovitsky, and I worked out a process. Is like how would you use zero copy clone and time travel in Snowflake to have dev, test, and production and promote things from one to the other, and then refresh. How'd you go about refreshing your dev environment? And I came out of an environment previous to this in the Oracle world where I never had dev and test with production loads of data. So even if we
Yeah,
optimized
I
our
never did
new
either.
our new work, we put it in production and it wouldn't perform because we couldn't do the performance tuning. And and there might have been aspects of the data that weren't represented in dev and test. And so when I started working with Justin and Guy on the DataOps.live team and talking about data ops and then the philosophy, it's like until Snowflake invented zero copy cloning, it was economically not feasible
Yeah,
for most organizations to do that. And now you can spin up, and you mentioned data science at the beginning. One of the use cases that I love is the ability to use zero copy clone to spin up a sandbox for the data scientists, right? That they can just have access to all this data, and when they're done with it, you just blow it away
blow it away.
because right, and there's no real overhead to it because it's that zero copy clone. It's not copying all the data. It's pointers to the data and it's versioned. And so back to your comment, yeah, we've done. People kind of got the idea of doing version control even on their DDL, right, on their create table
Right.
statements.
Yeah.
But the idea that you version the data as
Data
well, right?
itself,
And
right?
time travel did that with Snowflake. You got time travel on, you automatically have versioning of data for at least 90 days. And the way around it was to do a zero copy clone. If you want to have like a month end snapshot, you just zero copy clone your database at the end of the month and give it a name, put an extension on it,
There you go.
March 2022. Okay. And there it is. And somebody says, well, hey, we ran some reports back then and, now things have changed. The reports are breaking, can we figure out what happened? Okay. Well, we can go point to that zero copy clone of March 2022, run the reports again and see if we get the same answer, which of course we should, because we locked the database at that point. So yeah, that it's another layer of thinking, right? And that's all
Right.
part of data ops, and that's why we put it in the pillars, right? Is that it's not just having a Git repository with your code in it. It's being able to
It's
have these, point in time snapshots, what we used to call them, right? Of the data, and you
which
version the data. And so with
which used to take months sometimes to restore
well,
and get
if you were
back and
lucky,
make use.
right? If you're
back
lucky, you could
back in the
get it.
day, like just to be able to do it now, like
Yeah,
that
people would
is
say it's
so
like
amazing.
you'd ask, hey, can I get a refresh from SAP? Yeah, it'll be about 6 weeks, right? So yeah, so that's where that comes in, where that particular pillar is. Say, could you talk a bit about the state of automated testing in data BI? Testing is a very manual and cumbersome process. Man, is that such a true statement?
Have you
Yeah.
heard of a company called DataOps.live?
There you go. Yeah, yeah. The DataOps.live platform has automated
Definitely
regression
helps.
testing. It is one of the pillars of true data ops is to have automated testing and monitoring. And this is not just the code, but the data, like we were just talking about there, Ravi, is that you want to make sure your data didn't get changed some weird way and cause things to break. And so you need to be, and this it's bumps right up against data quality, right? What are we doing? If we change the pipeline, did we change the data in a way that we didn't expect? We had a new source,
Yeah.
changed the data in a way we didn't expect. And the only way to fix that is testing. But yeah, you're so right. So many people out there are still doing it manually.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's been the ability for the whole pipeline, the whole end-to-end flow. So, whether whatever your data ingestion, your transformation layers are, being able to build in the assertion testing and that type of capabilities into that platform as well. And then all the way to the reports. So being able to track and test all the way through is critical as well. So a lot of people just think about one piece, like Kent was talking about, where you really need to think about every step of the way from sources all the way through to the report, and where does the data stop? How's the data transformed? How is the data then delivered to those end reports? All that needs to be versioned and managed and have tests built into it so you can track it.
Exactly. I mean, it's the full data lifecycle. Wow, we used up our 30 minutes really fast here, Mark.
Flew
This
through
was
that
great.
time, Kent.
So I got to give you the one question I give everybody is that we're going to close out with here is, if you didn't do data, what would you do?
If I didn't do data, I probably, hopefully at this point in my career, if I wasn't doing data, I'd be a general contractor for building houses or something like that. I enjoy construction and construction work and building things, but I probably wouldn't be doing it still today, other than probably GCing it. So,
There you go. That's different. Yes, still use your project management skills, but
very much.
not having to necessarily write SQL every day.
I always said when I was in IT, building data warehouses and building data integrations and MDM and stuff was very much like construction. Eventually, you get done, you'd have something working, and you deliver it out to the business, and it was somewhat like that. So,
all right, well. That's great. So, well, thanks for being my guest today, Mark, and thanks everyone else for joining. We're going to have a little break over the holidays here for our live cast, so be sure to join us in January 2023. My guest is going to be my good friend Justin Mullen, who's the CEO and co-founder of DataOps.live. So I'm sure that it'll be a very interesting chat that I'll be having with him. And in the meantime, keep an eye out for an upcoming webinar called How to Create and Lifecycle Manage Snowflake Data Products at Scale with DataOps.live and Calibra. And you can go to DataOps.live.com to sign up for that. Actually, I think it's just DataOps.live. It's not DataOps.live.com. But anyway, so keep an eye open for that. The speakers on that will include Guy Adams, who's the CTO and co-founder, and also a Snowflake data superhero, some folks from Accenture, and a couple of DataOps customers who use Calibra, DataOps, and Snowflake. So that should be a very educational and exciting webinar for folks to join. So until then, everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. And we'll see you all in 2023. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you,
See ya.
Kent.